Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Audit Risk and Assurance Committee meeting. We are being recorded, so certainly the first time you speak, I would be grateful if you could just introduce yourself and to ensure that I comply with my own guidance, Brian Balstock, Chair of the Committee. So just moving into the agenda, I just want to make a special mention and welcome to Robert Scott, our new Chief Inspector. Thank you for joining us this morning, Robert. I hope you find it interesting, but you can tell me whether you did at the end of it. So thanks. Nice to see you and welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone.
And in terms of apologies, I mean, we have apologies from committee members Tim Wright and Bill McQueen. So we are operating this morning really on the margins of being quorum, so hence my nervousness about IT problems. Ali, are there any other apologies?
No other formal apologies, Chair.
No. Okay. That then takes us into consideration of items to be taken in private. The only thing we have scheduled for this session are the minutes from the previous private session. Is there anything else that anyone feels should be taken in private session? No. Okay, thank you very much for that. And then declarations of interest. Is there anything on the agenda that anyone is aware constitutes a conflict of interest? No. Well, as usual, should anything arise during the course of the meeting, then please holler. And then moving into the agenda proper, we have the minutes of the previous meeting on the 24th of March. Firstly, can I check to see if we agree these to be an accurate record of the discussion? Yeah, a few thumbs up, that's helpful, thank you. And secondly, are there any matters arising from the minutes that are not covered elsewhere on the agenda, including the action? No. Okay, well, on that basis, we will take these as an accurate record of that meeting. So thank you very much. That then takes us on to the associated action log. And Ali, will you just run through this, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the action log, as you will see on the summary page, has 4 in total, 3 of which have been marked blue as completed, and 1 which is marked green, so it's on track for completion. So just to confirm, the committee are content with the position statement updates and for the 3 marked blue to be removed and for the remaining 1 green to stay as is. Thank you.
Okay, everyone content? Yeah, okay, excellent. Okay, thank you very much for that. That moves us swiftly along into the first substantive item, which is the committee's annual report to the board and the accountable officer. And thanks to Ali in particular for contributing to the drafting of this. I'm not going to go through the report in great detail. The information is contained within the report. Just to highlight at paragraph 2, it explains the background for the report, which in essence is about providing an opinion to the board and the accountable officer on the comprehensiveness and quality of assurances that we've received throughout the year. And in that regard, I mean, obviously the work of internal audit is central to those assurances, and you will see at paragraph 4.3 that we're able to conclude that based on those internal audit reports and indeed the internal audit opinion, their annual opinion, we are able to conclude that controls are operating effectively. In a similar vein, I mean, we look at and take assurance from the work of the external auditors and HMFSI, and again, we're able to take positive assurance from the work of those 2 agencies. we spend a lot of time as a committee talking about risk management, both from a conversational point of view to understand how the arrangements are progressing, and specifically to look at individual risks, to use those discussions to try and assess whether the operation of the system is operating effectively. Once again, we are able to report extremely positively in terms of the development of risk management. And it is very satisfying to see the organisation moving at such a pace and in such a good direction on this topic. And I appreciate that the development of risk arrangements is very much a team effort, but I would want to highlight that the driving force for this, which is David Johnson, and commend him in particular for the excellent work that he does in really dragging the organisation, if that is not too disparaging on the organisation, to the point that we're at just now, and I think that's commendable. So, I mean, in summary, and the summary is included at the bottom of the report. I mean, we conclude that the service has effective risk management, governance, and internal audit arrangements in place. And one of the things that the report also covers is commentary on the committee's own effectiveness. And I just want to highlight, as I've done before, the excellent and pivotal role that the board support team play in all of that. I mean, they have unstintingly provided excellent support. So on behalf of the committee, many thanks for that. But I'd also like to extend that appreciation more broadly than board support, and that's to the executive team more widely and to the auditors, because, well, you don't need me to tell you how challenging a year it has been, but you would not really recognise that in the volume and quality of the support and contribution that we've received as a committee. So thank you very much for all of that effort. That is the report. I welcome any comments or questions from either committee members or those in attendance. Okay, well, I'll take that as being content. So thank you very much for that. That then takes us on to the next item, which is the annual governance statement. And Martin, are you going to talk to this?
Many thanks, Brian. Yes, I am. Martin Blunden, Chief Officer of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Thank you very much for the way you said the introduction to this report, Brian. It's been really helpful. And I'll take the similar style that you've set out with highlighting your report. My thanks go to both Ali Cameron and Hilary Sangster in particular for drafting of this report, and Hilary particularly for pulling together the annual governance statement. And I support wholeheartedly the comments made about David Johnston and the incredible work he's done over the last 18 months, really, from the discussion we started having about the way we integrate risk into a much more effective and proactive way into the organisation at every single level through the organisation. As you can see within the covering report, section 2 talks about the background and talks about how the evidence has been drawn using the 4 key assurance providers outlined in the SPFM. And then my main report detail naturally talks, spends 2 substantive paragraphs really around the way that the service has responded to COVID in the last 16, 17 months now, and the incredible work that's been undertaken during that period, not only in responding and ensuring that the controls are correct and in place for us to respond safely. The strategic objectives, as I've reported to the board before, included ensuring the financial propriety of the organisation was protected all the way through COVID, and that was one of our strategic objectives. And I believe that's really important as we respond to anything that's put in front of us, that we ensure the right controls are in place at the very early stages. And I was delighted with the overview that Her Majesty's Fire Service Inspectorate provided on our arrangements to respond to COVID, and also the internal audit and external audit's view on the service and what we have done and carried out during what has been probably the most difficult period that any of us will ever see in our careers. And we continue to respond to that even now into the next financial year. So I'm not going to go through the report in detail, Chair. I'm making the assumption that everybody around the virtual table has read the report, and I'm very happy to take questions and scrutiny on this report from members of ARAC.
Thank you, Martin. And I agree, it's a very comprehensive report, so thank you very much for that. Leslie.
Thank you. Leslie Bloomer, a board member of the Fire Service. Thanks, Martin. I think that both your report and Brian's report before it illustrate that we are well served in by the support we have on governance, both by Inspectorate, external and internal audit, and by the staff involved in these areas, crucially by the staff involved in these areas. So I think that that is all good. I have the tiniest of points in your report, Martin, which is the bit about the key highlights of board decisions. It looks as though all our approvals are down there, including agreeing that we're going to accept what the Scottish Government gives us for remuneration and approving our forward plan schedule. So if we're going to say highlights, can we just have highlights? That's the tiniest of points, but good report and very happy with it. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. It's always a difficult balancing act between the recording the decisions. I do believe it's a really important thing to record all the board decisions during the year. And I think if you just do highlights, I'm not sure where you draw the line between excluding some of the decisions that are made, because I do believe that in terms of the public record, it's important to put as many the decisions that you've done as a board. But I'll take that away and have that discussion with the board support team to see how we can better nuance that in future years.
Martin, I'm very happy and I understand the reason for what you're saying, in which case the answer is simply to say board decisions during 2021 and don't label it as highlights, and then I think that's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. Murray, do you have any specific comments? No. Okay. Martin, I have one or two very minor comments which I'll feed back to the team after this meeting. I just had one question really, and that was about, unless I've missed it, no specific reference to risk appetite. And I wonder, although accepting that it's work in progress, whether there maybe should be some reference to that work in progress.
Yeah, that is an interesting and it's a good question, Brian. I think one of the things we were going to do last year at the away days with the board was to discuss in detail the risk appetite of the board. And if you remember, we discussed it in May, June and July last year. Yeah. And then because of the way that our response to COVID went, the further development on that work was dropped. I think it's one of those we could have put in here, and I'm very happy to add into here if you so wish, the risk appetite discussions that we had or were extant in the previous financial year. But I suppose my view at the moment would be that would be the extant position in the 1920 year. We were having discussions and we didn't take those discussions to the end. So therefore anything that we put in here would suggest it was still hanging in the air, which I don't necessarily think it is to a certain extent. I'm very happy to take direction and counsel on that from you. Yeah,
I think it would be for completeness. I mean, given the importance of risk appetite as a principle in terms of the risk management framework, it feels like a gap, but I accept the point that, you know, we're in that sort of transition phase, and because of COVID, but I wonder whether a few foreign words might just help fill that gap.
Certainly, I'll take that away and add a suitable paragraph into this against risk appetite. I appreciate you saying that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So, if there are no further comments on that. We're being asked to scrutinise that report, which I think we have done primarily through a detailed reading of the report. So thank you to everyone for that. So that moves us into the chunk of the agenda, which is internal audit, and we have a fair amount of paperwork at this meeting relating to internal audit. So Matt, Gary, are you going to just take us through this a step at a time, please?
Yes, Chair. I'll quick. I'm Matt Swan, Associate Director with ASET's Fire Service Internal Auditors. I'll just let everybody know, just keep us in the right running order, who is speaking to which of those papers just now, so you have that awareness. And then I'll take through the papers that I'm going to talk through, and my colleague Gillian, Senior Manager with the firm, and Gary, as you all know, partner who leads our service with you. The papers that we have today for you are our snapshot progress report and 4 substantive internal audit reports. I'll take through the progress report itself and 2 of the internal audit reports being on expenses and procurement, with Jill taking you through the estates and the operational equipment reviews, with Gary effectively telling you the final opinion for the year in our annual report as our last substantive paper. Also, when talking about the progress report under item 9.1, I was also planning to cover off a verbal update, which is down as 9.4 on the 21-22 plan, and just make mention of that at that stage, because I think the two align, and it's worthwhile talking about those at that stage. If there's no comments on that, Chair, I'll proceed with the main substantive introduction to our progress report.
Yeah, content with that, Matt. Thank you.
The progress report itself, it's throughout the majority of the year, it's a snapshot to say how we're progressing with the plan and when you're going to be receiving the reports, and that we're on track to deliver the entirety of our work. This being the final one for 2020-21 is effectively just the wrap up and confirmation that we've delivered all of the work which we set out to in the year, in the main summary format that you have seen throughout the course of the year. Without meaning to sound like repeating some of what both Brian and the Chief have already mentioned, it's for me a very unique year of operating, having been appointed to serve as your internal auditors a little over 18 months ago. I don't think anybody on our team was expecting that we would spend more or less the entirety of our first year of working with you doing so remotely, which has presented some challenges for all involved, but I think ultimately has been overall a successful year, and that's reflected in the outcomes of our reviews, where we've raised a number of points across the different areas of work that we have done. The one point of detail that I would wish to highlight to the committee in relation to this report is the KPI summary as appendix to the report, and in particular item number 5. The reason I'm highlighting that is, for the eagle-eyed of you, you'll notice there is a difference between how that KPI is reported in our progress report here and our annual report, and I just want to clarify the position on that one. It's just simply an oversight is the long and the short is the short answer to this, with the status reported in the annual report being the accurate position on that. So that is amber on the basis, effectively as noted in the annual report, that there are a number of slightly older actions that remain to be addressed at this stage. So just wanted to clarify that point of detail. In terms of the overall content of the report itself, there isn't anything else that I would particularly want to draw to the committee's attention. And before proceeding to discuss the progress with the 21-22 plan, I'd pause at that point for any questions or indeed comments from the committee.
Okay, any questions or comments? No. Okay, I mean, I had a couple of comments on the KPIs, Matt, but I think I will defer that till we talk about the annual report. Probably makes some sense. So, so if there are no no observations, we will note with the correction that you identified the progress report, and that then takes us into the first of 4 internal audit reviews.
Brian, if I may, is it okay if I cover off the 21-22 update at this point? Because I think that's probably a natural place to cover that. Again, this is the position on this is we're still in discussions with management on the running order of the work for 21-22, with our more recent focus being on the closure of the 2020-21 audit programme to ensure that's been delivered and completed in time for this committee. To date, we've had some really good engagement and feedback from management on the prioritisation and order of the reviews which are due to take place throughout the year. The reflection that I have on that primarily is there's a real need, given the slight shift in effective target of our plan for the year that we are now in, from last year being more of a, for want of a better way of putting it, baselining as we understood the organisation. 21-22 is much more about a more targeted, risk-focused audit plan, and with that carries a need to ensure that we are undertaking the reviews at the time that's ultimately going to deliver the most value for the service as a whole. And we're still working with management to confirm the exact timing of when's going to add the most value ultimately to the service. What I would suggest with that in mind is once we've concluded those discussions fully with management, it may be useful to circulate the timescales for when we would undertake the audit, so there's appropriate sight of that, and that can either be at a future meeting or indeed potentially before the next meeting, if that's helpful.
Okay, Matt, thank you very much. Martin, you wanted to come in.
Thanks very much, Brian. Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate the work you're doing with John on this. One of the outputs from last year is that I have a very, very tired and very strained top team and everyone that reports into the directorates. I think that is something I know that you recognise, and I know you've been working with John Thompson on that. So I appreciate your willingness to shift things around slightly, which I recognise will also cause you some pinch points later on in the year. But because of the quantum of the work that we're doing to try and catch up and put in the right physical resources into the organisation to ensure we can do that in a timely manner, it does mean that we are a little less able to flex quickly than we would normally do. So I appreciate you recognising that and ensuring that we can meet you as close to halfway as possible in undertaking your assessment of us this year.
That's appreciated, Martin. When it comes down to it, for me, the important thing is that the value is maximised in doing that and recognising the draws on your team's time, and in particularly with example being the programme office, the more recent appointments, that's one which would naturally lend itself to being a more back-ended part of the year review, and we'll work as closely as we can to make sure that we're looking to deliver that in the way that works best for everybody, again, to add the maximum value across all of our work.
Thanks, Matt.
Well, that's, I mean, both your comments are greatly reassuring and clear evidence, I think, of the quickly maturing relationship between the internal audit team and the organisation. So greatly kind of assured by that. And obviously, you'll come back to the committee as early as you can, Matt. I think it would be helpful if by correspondence we could see that schedule as it forms. And I'm sure you will come back to us as early as you need to if there are any difficulties, which obviously may occur by compressing the plan into the back end of the year. But we all are well aware of the reasons that might be the case. So thank you for that. Okay, so that then now takes us on, Matt, I think, to the expenses review.
Indeed, and for those paying attention, that's me on this one as well. I think actually the way we've got it is I'm the first two as well, which is helpful. I won't spend a huge amount of time introducing the paper because I know everybody always takes the time to read these in advance, and that's evidenced by the handful of comments and questions that we had distributed in advance of today's meeting to us. The main things just really that I'd want to highlight is overall, we found that the processes here are working generally well, with two minor improvements noted particularly around the need to fully document the more recently developed new processes and the need to ensure that the manager review of claims is undertaken in a consistent manner, in addition to the work undertaken by the verification team. In terms of the overall background to this as well, one further thing I would wish to highlight is, and John may wish to come in with a little bit further detail on this point, that the policy itself is designed to encourage people to make use of more environmentally friendly options, including not travelling at all where needed, and indeed then almost a hierarchy established of more active travel through to the kind of final option of utilising a car. As an example, the policy itself doesn't exclude people from using a car if and where that's the most appropriate thing to be utilised, but just wanted to kind of draw that to your attention, because this is for me very much one where you need to take the hearts and minds of individuals, and the principles and framework behind it is really important to help encourage the behaviours of staff, but you still need to have enough opportunity where it's reasonable for people to travel and travel by certain means, that they're not effectively going to be penalised if that's a reasonable option. With that in mind, though, there isn't anything else I would particularly want to draw to the committee's attention, but happy to take either further comment from John in particular if there's anything worth adding, or indeed questions from committee members.
Yeah, I'll maybe start with you, John, just to give us, you know, your kind of brief thoughts on the review.
Yes, thank you, Brian. Excuse me. John Thompson, Acting Director of Finance and Procurement for the service. First of all, I welcome the audit on expenses. It's a good level of assurance for us. As Matt has said, there's no major weaknesses, but there's always areas for improvement, and we've identified, or there was two identified here. Of the two recommendations, the first one was around the expenses policy itself, and Matt's alluded to the fact that there's been fairly substantial change to the actual policy itself, but that action is now effectively closed and has been evidenced by that's the conclusion. Just picking up on, and Matt probably stole my thunder a little bit on the kind of hierarchy around the business travel. It is a shift in how we want to operate. It's a change in behaviour. It is saying, well, look, actually, first of all, try and avoid travel. We've all got used to using Teams, and actually that's something that we want to make sure that we have a part of a kind of permanent solution to avoid some of that business travel. Where we can, we will want people to either walk or cycle as the next element to it. I'm not sure how many people will jump to that as an offering, but then it's into kind of public transport, provided car or carpool, and then as a kind of last resort, using your own car or kind of taxi, and then finally, the worst case is really about travelling by air. So it's all designed to try and give people some information about trying to make the right choices in terms of our environmental impact. I think that's to be welcomed. It's also supported by the fact that we've made significant investment now in our electrical infrastructure. So we have electric cars available, we have pool car arrangements, so that we can actually undertake business travel in a more environmentally friendly way. The second area that I really wanted to kind of highlight to the committee was around the kind of changes that Matt talked around employee self-service expenses. The audit highlighted the fact that we are effectively removing some of those paper processes that we currently have. We're reducing the time for reimbursement, and we've changed how we authorise and validate expenses. In terms of our controls, there is now less reliance being placed on the line manager, and there's still a requirement for that approval to happen, but that approval comes after the actual payment has been processed. The control element then moves around that kind of validation in terms of the verification team and using data analytics. It has proved to be an effective control and one that's actually added value to the organisation in helping us to ensure and apply our expenses policy in a consistent manner. And we probably wouldn't have been able to do that hadn't we actually introduced that verification team. So I just wanted to highlight those two elements, but overall, we absolutely welcome the audit, which it does highlight that we've got a fairly robust process and something that we've actually changed fairly substantially as to how we're doing our business. And I'd open it up to any further questions from the committee.
Okay, John, thanks very much. Leslie, I know you had a couple of points.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks, Matt and John. Yes, I had 2 points. Firstly, about the policy and the environmental, our environmental ambitions, and secondly, about line manager approval. And both those points have been picked up in your opening remarks. So thank you for those. So if I can just, Chair, if I can check my understanding of what Matt and John have said. So the policy then very clearly reflects our environmental ambitions. So just checking if an officer was to choose to use their private car when viable public sector transport or other options were available, would that expense claim be approved for payment?
So we're not going to constrain, and I think it's difficult to turn around and say, well, look, in this instance, you know, you've used your car, we're going to reject your claim. That's not the intent of the policy. The intent of the policy is to guide people to make the right decisions as to how they're going to use business travel. In most circumstances, it's what you've described. Officers in particular will have a provided car, and then they will have access to a pool car, and that pool car will be effectively or hopefully be an electric car. So it's about us facilitating individuals to make the right choices around business travel. And I think that's the only thing that we can really do, Leslie, is give that guidance and give that steer to them rather than the kind of stick of, well, we're not approving your expense claim because you've had to use a car on this occasion.
I think that's a helpful response, and I guess just to push it a little further, I'm thinking of another circumstance where literally there was about 10 grand saved by different managerial approaches to encouraging people to make those changes. But that links to my second point, which is line manager approval. And you're saying that the verification team is giving a more consistent application, a more consistent implementation. So it sounds as though that might be addressing the risk that I see in this. So perhaps you could tell me a bit more about how the verification team approves and challenges, well, how they challenge and the line manager approve, how all of that works. Thanks.
Okay, Leslie, yes. I have to say I have been overwhelmed by the verification team and how quickly they have responded to the new ways of doing or completing our business expenses. It's using the tools of data analytics, so we actually are able to bring in all of that data around all of our expenses. So rather than going through individual claims, we're using the power of all that data, saying, well, actually, what are the areas that are perhaps inconsistent? What are the areas that looks like exceptions? What are other elements that we can actually identify that would suggest that we would want to review a claim in more detail? And that then gives us a more targeted risk-based response to how we're actually dealing with that expense claim. But what it also has done is it's highlighted that perhaps where a line manager an expense claim has been coming through the process, we suddenly realised that actually there's maybe been the policy hasn't been applied consistently. So it's maybe been applied in the East in a particular way in the past, and that's just been perpetuated. So the verification team are now able to say, oh, well, hang on a minute, there is a policy around this, and you should be applying X, Y, and Z. And we feel that that's actually worked quite favourably because once we've fed that back, people can then say, right, I understand, and we're now more consistent with the policy. So to my mind, that's the value added element in and around the verification team, educating and actually guiding us. And then when there's subsequent change to our policies or procedures, we've got that verification team in place to make sure that we are actually applying it consistently going forward. So I hope that perhaps helps explain it a little bit more.
It does. So what you're saying actually is the verification team is a more effective method of implementing the policy than individual line manager approval is before payment. Okay, I think it was, yeah, sorry. What's the cost to the organisation of having this verification team?
So what we've done is we've effectively switched resources. So in the past, we would have resources at the payroll input stage. So we effectively, when claims come in, we had to key them into the system, and we had to then check the claims. So we have moved some of the resources from that payroll team into the verification team, and so it's been a shifting of a resource rather than additional resource overall. And in my mind, it's a more effective use of that resource. So no real significant change in terms of the actual cost profile. I guess the other benefit that has been well appreciated is that people are getting their expenses paid much earlier than they would have they adopted the kind of paper process. So that's encouraging as well.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Chair, for allowing me to ask some quite detailed questions. But I think expenses policy is always it's a bit of a financial risk, but it's a much bigger reputational risk, and it's also a risk in terms of our environmental ambitions. So forgive me for going into a bit of operational detail, but I found that very helpful to understand how that risk has been managed, and I am happy, very happy with what John has outlined as the processes in place. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. No, they were all very good questions. Do we have any other questions on the review? I just had a point of clarification, and depending on that clarification, John, maybe a question, because I thought what you were describing there in terms of the new system was that the authorization part of the process was still part of the process, but it occurred after the point of payment. So if that's the case, and maybe this is down to timing, the audit report talks about 9 out of 24 cases checked, no evidence that the line manager had reviewed the claims prior to the verification team review. So I'm slightly confused by that inconsistent presentation.
John frozen?
Well, yeah, I was beginning to wonder whether I had frozen or whether John had frozen, but John appears to have frozen, or he's just deep in thought. I'm not sure. Yeah. Well, maybe David, I see you've got your hand up. I'm assuming you're going to come in to help here.
Thank you, Chair. It's David Johnson, Risk and Audit Manager. I'll do my best. I think one of the... Oh, sorry, John's back.
Sorry, apologies, my internet dropped off here in the office. So, Brian, if I remember correctly, you were asking about that line manager approval and about the audit itself. And basically what happened, or the situation was that we're asking for the line manager to approve subsequent to payment. What the audit had highlighted is that we still have some challenges where line managers are not then completing that approval, and therefore we're chasing them back through to make sure that happens. The verification part of that, and what the audit actually highlighted, was that the verification team picked up every single item around that, so it was 100% successful. So in my mind, that highlights the the effectiveness of the verification control, and it almost says, well, look, actually, I understand that the line manager should approve subsequent to the payment, but we know that we've got the right processes in place and robust enough to make sure that we can be confident that we're paying expenses appropriately. So hopefully that helps explain it, Brian. I know you said prior, and I think it's probably post.
Well, perhaps Matt, can you help us here? Whether it's just it says prior when it should say post.
Yeah, I'll just kind of quick couple of very small points. I'll just firstly echo John's sentiment on that it's not putting words in our mouths that we're not comfortable with. John summarised that absolutely spot on as far as I'm concerned. For me, the key on this, though, is looking at what the overall kind of range of controls that you have in place. And some organisations that we've seen would literally just have that verification team. And for me, and as we talked about with John through the conclusion of this report, it's about making sure for the maturity of the organisation that balance of controls is right to be able to pick things up. I completely echo that the verification team did pick up on the points that they should have done. And as far as I'm concerned, this is effectively a secondary control of checking by the line manager. In time, that might be something which could actually be removed in its entirety once the team overall is comfortable that the verification team has a long enough history of identifying those key points. And for me, I don't think we're a million miles away from that. It's more of an organisational choice at when that point would be right. But John, you may want to come back in because I know we've had a little bit of chat on this and you think that might be a little bit previous to get to that point just now.
I mean, sorry, John, just before you come in, and sorry for perhaps being a bit pedantic over this point, but Matt, if I can refer you to page 5 of the report, where it talks about 9 of the 24 sample, no evidence that the line manager had reviewed the claims prior to the verification review team review. Now, as I understand John's description of the new process, they would not be expected to authorise it prior, they would be expected to authorise it post. So it's that point I'm confused upon.
Sorry, Brian. John's statement on that should be post rather than prior is correct.
Right. Okay, that's fine. Okay, well, we got there in the end, so thank you for that. And just one final point, John. I think there's different schools of thoughts around guidance as opposed to hard rules, and you know it's no more evident at the moment around what's happening with COVID guidance. And well, I'm not going to comment on that broader picture, but are there plans to at some point reflect upon whether you facilitating environmentally appropriate behaviour is actually achieving the objective? Do you plan to do that at some point?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're doing through an environmental carbon management board is we're trying to drive forward some of those changes across the organisation in terms of how we tackle the environmental elements. As an example, we are now including business travel as part of the baseline for reporting our CO2 emissions. So through that reporting, we can then establish are we making that improvement in terms of business travel going forward. So I do think we have some mechanisms in place to see are we actually making the right changes? Are we actually seeing some of the changes in behaviours? And is that translated into the reporting that we then have going forward in terms of our CO2 emissions? So hopefully that gives you some confidence, Brian.
That's excellent, John. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, that was a short report with two relatively minor objectives. So hopefully that's not a sign of things to come. But we now move on to the procurement and tendering report, which I am confident won't require too much conversation. Matt.
I'll try to keep the summary on this one brief because the vein of this is similar in many respects to the expenses, where again we're recognising an overall well-working control environment with two relatively minor areas of improvement in relation to maintenance of up-to-date training records and appropriate alignment of KPIs being reported in a smart manner. The one other thing that I would probably just want to kind of emphasise is in relation to that second point, where there was a new strategy under development whilst we were undertaking the audit, but it wasn't in a shareable state whilst we were completing our work, hence why we don't make specific comment from that, and that's noted within the management response that has now been through various committees prior to finalisation. There isn't anything else that I would particularly want to draw to the committee's attention, but as with the previous report, it may be helpful if John had any comments prior to any questions from the committee.
Yeah, John, if you could keep this brief, it would be appreciated.
Absolutely, Chair, and I will keep it very brief. So once again, a good audit reflects the robust policies and procedures that we have in place, and it really just supports the work that we've done in the past around our PSIP process to change the kind of highest performance ranking as part of the kind of Scottish Government family. As Matt has said, of the two improvements, one has already been completed and ARAC has seen that, and it's also been signed off by the board. So don't really have much more to say on that, but welcome the overall audit. So hopefully that's short and snappy enough, Brian.
Okay, that's brilliant, John. Thank you. Leslie's delighted. Thank you, Leslie. Any questions? No, and none from me. So excellent report, and excellent assurance that an important part of the business is running as it should be. So well done to everyone. And then that takes us on to estates, asset management and maintenance. That's not with you this time, Matt?
That's right, Brian. Jill.
Right, Jill. Okay.
Yeah, I shall keep this as brief as I can. Basically, for the estates asset management and maintenance, we found that generally the processes for planned and reactive maintenance that were in place were fine and were operating effectively. To draw your attention to the two sort of main issues that we identified, we found that there's a high-level asset management strategy in place, but with regard to estates, there wasn't actually an estates strategy, overarching estate strategy that sat below that, which actually sort of set out more detail of how the asset management strategy was going to be implemented. And also following on from that, we found that the policies and procedures that were in place, they were very sort of fragmented process charts and procedure notes. So I think there is a need to obviously review the procedures that are in place to make sure that they're fit for purpose and that they do sort of cover all the sort of areas of operations, so staff have appropriate guidance. So I think, as I say, the main issue coming out this one was the lack of an overall estate strategy, which sort of sets out the long-term plan for how the estates, the SFS estate is going to be managed going forward. So those were the main issues. I don't know, I know that Ian's with us today. I don't know if he's got any more comment on the report, but I'm happy to take questions as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. And Ian, would you just like to give us a kind of brief response from a management perspective, please?
Certainly, Chair. Ian Morris, Acting Head of Asset Management at the moment. Chair, just with a wee bit of latitude at the moment, could I just introduce Ijaz Bashir, who's on as an observer today. Now, Ijaz is coming on to as Asset Governance and Performance Manager. Now, this is as a result of vacancies that we've had within the asset management team. We've done a realignment and we're pulling together an asset performance and management coordination team to look holistically across the three areas within my references, or the four areas that are within my references going forward, being fleet, property, equipment and energy and environment, as well as research and development. So Ijaz is going to be working on that. So it's just to introduce them to the committee board members going forward. What I would like to say with regards to the audit, certainly we welcome the audit going forward, but I think we'd also like to pay thanks to the audit team from Assets, because the way they conducted this during the pandemic, and especially the staff around the estates and the the subsequent equipment team were basically in the middle of dealing with some of the key issues there, but their approach was welcomed, and the way the professionalism and the way they conducted the audit was certainly welcomed for my team as well going forward. The audit we have there, we wholeheartedly agree. There's not an estate strategy at the moment. This was discussed many years ago when we looked to form the strategies, and the then board and SLT deemed that they only wanted a reduction in the amount of strategies that were coming forward to the board going forward. We concluded with putting the asset management holistic strategy in place. We acknowledge now that that's probably incorrect and not the appropriate way to go forward. So we're working with John McDonald and the SDMP team to look to see how the strategy is going to be influenced when we start to look towards that wider arching review of the fire service going forward. And that's probably one of the reasons we've kind of held the brakes back in a wee bit. But what we have agreed as part of the actions to this is we'll develop an interim estate strategy which will still assist and inform the outcomes of the SDMP, because obviously that will have a major critical influence on how we operate and use these estates and how they're managed, and that needs to filter back into the estate strategy going forward. So we'll do an interim one at the moment until the SDMP has been agreed and through that process, which we know is going to be a wee bit longer than the current short-term envisaged reports that are going forward. So we've agreed to that, and again, I think we fully agree with the audit outcomes that some of our policies and flowcharts and various elements that are there are probably needing review. They were dated probably 2015, 2016, and a refresh and a review of all our policies and procedures will be carried out as part of that recommendation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ian. Leslie, I know, before I come to you, Mary.
I'm okay with you going to Leslie if you want to, Brian.
No, please carry on.
It was just, Ian, it was really just noting the acceptance of both of those recommendations, and you've got your planned programme of work. It was really just if I could get some concept of the time frame for that work from your perspective, as much as you may not have it detailed yet. And also just for my own knowledge as much as anything else, what's the governance process likely to look like around the estate strategy?
The governance route for authorisation of the estate strategy will be performed first and go to MLB, Asset Management Liaison Board, and then up through SMB to SLT. Then I would leave that for the chief to decide what group it would then go to with regards to the board. And that'll be all three strategies. We're going to be doing three strategies. I know the next one talks about the equipment one, but I may as well mention it at the moment. We'll be doing an estate strategy, an equipment strategy, and a fleet strategy, sitting underneath an overall asset management strategy. Each of them will have a section of performance plans and metrics, which EJAS is going to work on behind the scenes as well.
Thanks, Ian. If I can just pick you up on the likely timeframes for some of that.
The first one we're hoping to have two of them done this side of Christmas. We're hoping to have two of them done this side of Christmas, and the third one will probably be falling over into the new year. Now, it'll probably be the fleet one we're doing first, because we see there's because of the energy and the carbon and the reduction that we just spoke about there with regards to expenses. There's much more of a pressure, we believe, from ourselves at the moment to get that one topped and tailed. So that's my primary one doing at the moment, and then it'll be followed by the estates one, and then followed by the equipment one thereafter.
Okay, thank you. And is that okay, Mary? Yeah, okay. Leslie.
Yeah, thanks very much. Hello, EJAS, welcome. Good to see you. We work together at South Ayrshire, and it's great to see you're appointed to the fire service. Thanks, Ian, for the response to the report. All the greens that are in the audit report, I recognise from dealing with you and with your team. You know what you're doing, and it's great to see that. So congratulations and well done to the team on all of those areas. I am interested in the strategic input that assets are making to the SDMP, and can you just talk to me a bit about how that's happening at the moment? And I welcome that the estate strategy in particular will be. I welcome that the overall strategies will come in, but how's the strategic contribution of assets to SDMP going at the moment, please?
Yeah, it's going well. Well, first of all, thanks, Leslie, and certainly EJAS coming on, we see is adding immense value to our team going forward. So we're looking forward to his input going forward. He's certainly in these development stages at the moment and introduction stages at the moment. So going back to the SDMP, yeah, at the moment, we've, as you're well aware, we've done the suitability and condition assessments of each of our properties across the whole 356 sites and the 600 buildings that we've got across there. So we're feeding that back in to see this is the current condition, the current suitability and the current capacity. Now, looking at the SDMP and where the service's intentions and the various options appraisals which are within that overall SDM review, we are then building on the back of that. So if you, without getting into too much of the weeds here in technical detail, if we're talking about changing the function of an RDS station to a whole-time station, then what does that impact on the estate? We can provide that level of information to them, albeit the costs are still a wee bit ropey at the moment with the increase in cost for steam and materials across the piece. But we are providing that information to say you don't have suitability, dignified facilities for female staff, you don't have this, if you're turning an RDS into a whole-time, or you're bringing a day crew in, because even bringing a day crew in will have the same requirement for the facilities on site, albeit it won't have the dorms and the various elements. So we're looking at these various permutations of each of the sites and each of the individual bases and feeding back in. We're also feeding in the footprints of the stations to say that we recognise that the majority of our stations, and we've been saying this from day one, are not fit for purpose with regards to the level of investment and backlog investment. So we're now going back to them and saying, if you're wanting to take this, then we need to then work on an SDM strategy which is affordable, deliverable, and meets the needs of our crews and the communities, because obviously we're looking to see whether we can enhance the community aspect of these sites as well going forward, and the community rooms and various others. We're also engaging on a tripartite level with police, fire and ambulance, and now Royal, the RNLI and some various other parties in NHS to look at the shared facilities and the shared agenda to see whether we can do some collaboration. So we're already floating some ideas round about some of our stations, nothing to do with SDMP, but where we have got critical pressure points at the moment. We're floating these ideas at the moment to see whether there's an appetite with our partners to come into bed. Once that's agreed and we start looking at how to overlay that on top of SDMP and where that's going, and when the board and the SLT make their decisions on the final options appraisal, then hopefully, like the onion, you'll have all these different layers sitting on top of each other that we can influence it as much as going forward. What we have agreed, sorry, and I'm going to be a little long-winded here, so apologies. What we have agreed is once the SDMP has been finalised, we will need probably about 6 to 7 months to do a financial investment plan on each of the estates based on any recommendations or changes for that estates going forward, and that will fall on the back of SDMP. I hope I've answered the question.
No, that's enormously helpful, Ian. I guess the biggest question mark in my head is the overall affordability, and I'm just wondering. I kind of, the way I picture it is the SDMP is here's the ideal, and the standard station design, here's the ideal, and I wonder whether the asset team is saying here's your healthy dose of realism. As to what is actually achievable, and is that how it's playing out? Is estates playing that role?
I think the chief would probably jump in before me and say that I'm always very realistic in my approach when I'm providing advice going forward. Yes, we are providing that. We're absolutely, at the moment, we've kicked off, as you know, we've got some pressures to do with UAG with regards to the Calmac ferries and the various elements that's coming in there. The station's currently leased, and we're getting asked to look. So we're now looking at a hybrid version of the standard station design. Now, with that, I mean, it meets the criteria, but slightly reduced and slightly lower to fit the current footprint of a site we own in there. So we're looking at that flexibility approach to say, yes, we know you've got a garden shed in some occasions, but what do you need? You don't need a £2-3 million fire station there, but can we do something in between, which is then affordable, you know, meets the affordability envelope going forward. But the overall totality of what the SDMP could be, no, I couldn't tell you what that final price tag is going to be at this point.
Okay, but what you've said there is helpful, because that's exactly the type of thing that I would hope to see in an asset strategy. Is here's the ideal, here's what's practical, here's how we're going to marry up what we can practically do against the what we would like to do. Thank you for that. Sorry, Martin, you want in?
Thanks, Leslie. Yeah, just to provide a little bit more context for Ian. Yeah, Ian's absolutely spot on. He provides a healthy dose of reality on a regular basis, and actually that's a really valued characteristic in an acting director, that actually as we're talking through ideas, then we get well, actually, no, we don't think we can do that. I think it's worth just remembering just how much of a backlog we have in our capital programme. And actually I've asked Ian to bring back a paper to SLT, which will then come through to the board, which talks about the up-to-date valuation. So if you remember the May 15 report by Audit Scotland. They then revisited that in May 2018 and concurred with the figures that the service had provided to the board to say that the backlog was around the 400 million mark. So effectively, it's a 10-year commitment of about £60 million a year would bring us up to where we need to be. I think in the reality of the economic situation that we're in, the desire for us to work together with our public sector and third sector partners, there's no way that that's going to happen. And so we're working on a strategy that looks like the shape of Scotland's fire service for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So you're quite right, the SDMP or the CRIM will inform the SDMP, and that will give us a modern footprint for Scotland. You know that our fire stations are based on the World War II shape, size and layout. And when the boundaries were taken away, when we became a single service in 2013, we didn't take away any of the fire stations that are very close to boundaries. The SDMP will inform where we need those physical assets. The cost is likely to be huge, and the realism will not just be from assets, but actually will be what Scottish Government would like to fund the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to provide a 21st century fire and rescue service within Scotland. So there are some significant challenges to come. And you'll remember from the conversation that ACO Paul Stewart had with the board in May when he presented the SDMP timeline overlaid with the UFAS consultation and the visiting consultation, how that will be coming to you as the board in particular to make decisions and when those things will be coming. So just bear that all in mind and how that will sequence together to form, I think, a fairly complex but very rich picture over the course of the next 12 to 18 months. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Leslie. Thanks, Martin, and thanks, Ian, for all that colouring in that you've given us. And you highlighted the overlap between this review and the next review on operational equipment. But just to talk about this report and its comments around outdated policies or procedures and policies, and I just wondered about the associated risks there, Ian, because at one level, you know, having a policy or a procedure may be seen as a bit of bureaucracy, a bit of admin, but actually, if viewed through the lens of, say, health and safety, these are important kind of reference points. And if, you know, hope to God nothing ever goes awry, but if we have not up-to-date policies and procedures in this respect, we will be in some difficulty. In terms of responding to not just the need for an interim strategy, but looking at the need to refresh some of these key policies, are there particular priorities that you identify that will be kind of at the top of your list?
Yeah, I can answer that, Chair. First of all, the health and safety element, we've actually seconded a business partner now from health and safety who's embedded within asset management, looking at all our health and safety aspects and risk approach, because obviously, with the exception of the fire ground, the asset management is probably one of the higher risks with fleet and equipment and various other elements there. And usually when there are any injuries, it's related to one of the assets is within there. So that embedded officer has absolutely been, over the last 6 months, 8 months, has been putting in immense value across there. And Lorraine is looking at all the policies and procedures within property, fleet and equipment, and we're refreshing them as we speak going forward. The other element to layer on this is we're in the middle of tendering hard FM, so that will change the policies associated with the defect reporting and the various elements there. So that's a key element that will sit under the hard FM replacement policy. We've just put in 18 months to a year ago the soft FM policy, so these hadn't been refreshed at the time of the audit. We're going back and looking at some of these and refreshing some of these policies going forward. The policies are there, they are dated, but they're needing refreshed and re-brought up to date and reviewed going forward. And some of them are fragmented, that were ex-legacy policy that we adopted and we haven't properly formatted them into the correct order we should have done. And it is a key priority. The team is working on it as we speak at the moment, and it's one of the deliverables we'll have done quickly is the review of the policies.
That's great, Ian, and really encouraged to hear the emphasis that's being placed on health and safety. So very much welcome that. Okay, I think we've probably exhausted comments and questions on this report. So thanks very much to Ian and the team. That then takes us on to the operational equipment report. And Jill, are you going to talk to this?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, with regards to the operational equipment audit, we found that the processes for the maintenance of the operational equipment, as well as the records that were being maintained on the Trainman database, were operating effectively. We made a minor recommendation just regarding the document for reporting faults. I think it referred only to vehicle fleet, but obviously it needs to include operational equipment. And I think I've been subsequently advised that after the audit that has been amended, that's already been implemented. As we mentioned before, there is a common theme regarding strategies that sit beneath the overall asset management strategy. And once again, we sort of identified the need to have an operational equipment strategy, basically looking more sort of strategically at this area and long term as to what you need. The other issue we identified was regarding reporting arrangements. The asset management strategy stipulates sort of 5 key areas for performance reporting. Now, I know there are some updates. We saw evidence of reporting to the Asset Management Liaison Board in respect of what's going on in this area. However, I think there's a need to look at reporting and also the KPIs to make sure that those sort of 5 key areas are actually being covered and that the Asset Management Liaison Board receive appropriate and complete information in order for them to sort of base their decisions upon that. So those were the sort of key 2 areas that we identified coming out of this audit.
Okay, Jill, just before I open things up, did you have any observations on the appropriateness of the 5 KPIs?
Well, it wasn't actually the actual 5 areas. I say it wasn't actually a set KPI. It was just areas such as, you know, what's the condition? Are we getting value for money? So I think the 5 areas that have been identified in terms of performance were quite, you know, all encompassing. They were quite good areas to have. So I haven't got an actual issue with them. I think it was just the fact that the minutes that we looked at and you know, the agendas that we looked at for the Asset Management Liaison Board just didn't really cover all those particular areas. And I think there's a need to make sure that they do have oversight of, you know, performance in those terms.
Okay, that's great. Ian, you have your hand up. I was going to invite you to say a few words anyway.
Okay, Chair. Again, welcome the report. Very much so. In the third action, that Gillian alludes to has been actioned and has been resolved. So that's been sorted out. The strategy one, I won't get into that again because, as I said, we've already given a commitment. We'll be doing these strategies. The KPI one, again, we've always said, you know, within asset management, we can continue to look inward at ourselves, and we started the change process to bring EJAS in probably about 18 months ago by looking at to create this unit. We recognised back then that our KPIs that we produce, now we do produce various suites, they're not joined up in an asset management reporting methodology coming forward, and that's the area that EJAS will be looking at coming forward, is to pull together. Now, what we have got is, if I'm being brutally honest, is probably a mixture of KPIs and LPIs, local performance indicators, and KPIs. So we will be doing a thorough sort of top and tail review of all performance indicators and reporting them through MLB going forward, and that's again on the target to be done before the end of this fiscal year.
Excellent. Can I just ask a question similar to Leslie's point, but just on these improvement areas? I mean, given the importance of them, in terms of following up on these, and I don't know if this is a question for you, Ian, or for Azette, in terms of reporting back to the committee on that progress, how will that happen and when will that happen?
We'll be reporting through the performance group set up for to do it. Karen Horrocks is on the line at the moment, and David Johnston, they'll have periodic meetings to measure our performance against the assets and the improvement pod towards the action. Sorry.
And from the internal audit follow-up perspective, will it be able to provide us commentary on where we've got to that point in time?
Yeah, I have regular meetings with Karen where we discuss the progress in implementation. She, as I say, she's good at actually sort of trying to get the information and the updates from the various departments for us. And then obviously once she's collated that information, we discuss it and we seek verification of the status of the implementation of the recommendations. So that's the way it's done. So it will be reported at quarter. You'll get an update on what's happening in each of the recommendations.
Splendid, thank you. Any questions on this report?
Could I
Leslie?
come in? Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks, Ian. Another good report. I just wanted to pick up on the chicken and egg aspect of this, the service delivery strategy and the strategy for the management of operational equipment. So yeah, can you just talk me through the interlinkages of those two bits of work?
Well, the strategy for operational equipment at the moment has been changing. Obviously, we've had different pressures on it since 2013. The first one was to look at the rollout of standardisation of BA, which was now completed. We then looked at the issues we had with the PPE, the fire kit, and we've now concluded that the full complete rollout of the fire kit. The main key issue at the moment is looking at the PRE and HRE, the hydraulic risk equipment, and the potential near misses we've had with regards to injections, hydraulic injections. So there's a fundamental change from what we were previously doing to concentrate now on that. What we'll be building in is working with the service delivery area and looking at their concept of operations and future vision of what the service is going to look like, and the vehicles and the equipment is sitting in this is to accompany the SDMP and work with the SDMP as well going forward. And we will then build the equipment strategy based on the requirements from the customer, i.e. the front end stations, what equipment they're needing going forward. You've probably seen in the news recently where we've just completed the full assessment of water rescue equipment and rolling out a complete package of 20 new kits for this. So that standardised approaches went there. We've just awarded a contract for up to £22 million worth of medium rescue pumps, fully kitted, fully going. So again, there's been a lot of excellent good work being done there, but we have failed miserably, and I will say that myself, to put that in the strategic document and to be able to communicate that back as a performance indicator back to the MLB and others, and that's what we're going to be working on, and EJAS has been brought in to do as well. Did that answer your question, Leslie?
Thank you, perfect.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So that's been a really good discussion, and thanks, Ian, for your candour. As always, really much appreciated. And taking these two reports together, I mean, yes, they make some observations where improvements can be made, but it's important that these should be set in context of the excellent work. And from the committee's point of view, where the control weaknesses have been identified, it's clear from your response in the report and through questioning today that you fully understand the issues and are setting about addressing them. I think EJAS is going to have his work cut out, because I heard his name mentioned several times there, so he's going to be a busy boy, I think, over the coming months. So
thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you now. So thanks very much for everyone for the discussion around those reports. And that then, Matt, takes us on to the Internal Audit Annual Report for 2021.
So I'm going to take this one, Chair, if that's
okay. Okay, Gary, thank you.
So I'll just talk you through the annual report from Internal Audit, which summarises all of the work undertaken by Internal Audit over the year. So starting off on page 1, we confirm that we comply with public sector internal audit standards in the work that we do. Those standards require us to provide an annual opinion on our work, and that's what this document does. So page 2 sets out the basis for the overall opinion, all of the work that we do during the year. It obviously notes that we don't audit absolutely everything, and we audit on a sample basis, and we're not able to cover absolutely everything. So it's reasonable assurance and not absolute, and it always is when you're dealing with internal audit or any or most forms of audit. But based on the work that we have done, we have concluded that the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service has a framework of governance, risk management and controls that provides reasonable assurance regarding the effective and efficient achievement of objectives. And that's the best opinion that you can get from internal audit. So that's a good outcome for the service for the year in relation to the controls framework and risk management framework and so on. The rest of the report goes out to set out how we undertook the audit work during the year. That's set out on page 4. Page 5 sets out the coverage that we achieved, and we delivered the audit plan in full. And it also contains a table of the reports that we issued during the year. And you can see from the pie charts in that report that you're mainly greens, yellows and ambers in most of the reports. And that's the evidence we're using, obviously, to support the opinion that we give you. Moving down, we then talk about progress in implementing previous internal audit actions and our view that the fire service has made good progress in closing outstanding actions across the year, and that's really important. It shows that management are prioritising internal audit findings, and they are on that continuous improvement journey, so they do take our recommendations seriously, and they do implement them. Some key themes emerging from our work around some of the amber risks that we identified, mainly in 3 key areas. Those are ICT and data security, which is the subject of a previous report and much discussion at the last committee meeting. Operational equipment that we've discussed today, and estates management and maintenance that we've also discussed today, and those are summarised in those sections of the report. We confirm that we are independent of the fire service and we're able to make these judgments. We recognise that we're working in a COVID-19 environment, and I think we have good arrangements for working with management to make sure that we deliver our work well and provide the assurance that we need to. Again, confirmation that we comply with public sector internal audit standards. Appendix 1 shows that we delivered all of the days and all of the reports that were asked of us. And Appendix 2 summarises quality, our own internal quality assurance assessment. This is an annual assessment of the whole of the internal audit team. It's not about the fire service audit, it's about all of the audits that we do across the department. But we do want to show openly and transparently that we subject ourselves to a quality assurance framework, and we take any quality improvements on the service that we provide seriously also. So we thought it was helpful to set that out for the committee. And then Appendix 3 shows the progress against KPIs, and Matt's comment that there is 1 amber in there on the percentage of follow-ups, largely around prior years, which is causing the amber outcome. Happy to take any questions or queries in relation to the annual report.
I'm not sure, has Brian dropped off the call?
Yes, I can see Brian.
Okay, as Deputy Chair, I'll take on chairing for the moment. This does put us for the time being in an inchoate position. In preparation for this meeting, Brian and I discussed that should we be in this position, we would continue the meeting. When Brian returns, we can then recap, and if he is comfortable, we can then homologate the decisions, and that should mean that we can progress the business of the meeting. Is everybody okay with that as a way forward?
Chair, may I interrupt?
Yep, certainly.
I'm not sure we are in quorum because I'm in attendance. So because I'm in attendance, I'm able to be considered part of the quorum.
In which case, that's helpful, and we'll still afford Brian the courtesy of recapping when he comes back on. But thank you for that point, Kirsty. And I'm assuming because Richard is not coming in that he accords with all of that.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so Gary, I think you had concluded the commentary on the report, and are there any questions or points? Okay, we're happy with the report, and our recommendation there was to approve it or to scrutinise it. Let me just check. To note the contents, so we're noting the contents of the annual report. Thank you. Okay, so we are moving on now to item 9.3, which is the progress update on the internal audit recommendations of what we've just been talking about. Gary, are you going to take us through this?
This is one for Matt, I think.
It's me to do that one.
Oh, Jill, right.
Jill, thanks. Okay. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. Yeah, this is just our report on the status of the implementation of the outstanding recommendations. I won't go through it in detail, but just to give you the sort of summary position. As you can see from the dashboard, we managed to close 5 recommendations since the last meeting. There are still 31 recommendations to be fully implemented, 16 of which are still within their dates for implementation. However, 15 of those are out with the original implementation date and have revised dates. However, of the recommendations, we're pleased to see that from the ASIC's recommendations, there are no outstanding grade 4 recommendations. There's only 1 grade 3 recommendation outstanding. So the majority of them are sort of grade 2 or 1 recommendations. So obviously, you know, they're not high risk areas. As I think Matt alluded to earlier, there are a number of actions which are scheduled to be completed before the end of the year. So there's obviously a need for a focused effort on making sure that they stay on track with regard to the implementation of those recommendations. So I was always going to say, really, I mean, we're pleased to see that the progress has been made in some of the areas. And just one thing I wanted to make clear as well, that this is very much a snapshot of the position as it was at the end of May when we last updated the report. But obviously since then, I had a further update from Karen yesterday, and we found on some of them that there has been further progress. And I think a couple have actually been implemented now, albeit we're still awaiting verification of the implementation of some of those recommendations. So as I say, progress is being made. And obviously on those ones, we will provide a sort of further comment at the next audit committee meeting. But I don't know if you've any questions on the follow up.
Sorry, Ali had just pinged me, but Ali, you just want to say what you've pinged me about?
Yes, certainly, Leslie. Yeah, just with regard to Brian being unable to continue the call, I've spoke with him, so he's going to reattempt to try and get access to the meeting.
Sorry, I'm back now.
Back now, Brian. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Sorry, okay. So, so yes, thanks for that, and apologies, everyone.
Okay, Brian, where we got to then was Gary finished on item 9.2. There were no questions, so we noted that, and we noted with Kirsty in attendance that actually we were quorate. So unless you have any questions you wanted to raise in item 9.2, you're just joining us for item 9.3, and Jill had taken us through item 9.3, and we were just about to move into questions on item 9.3. So that's you up to date, and I'll just hand back to you just now. Thanks.
That's great, Leslie. Thank you very much for that. And I did get back into the call in time to hear Jill do her introduction. So thanks for that, Jill. And Mary, you had some questions.
It wasn't necessarily specific questions or detail a couple of things. It was just more a question that I appreciate this was the end of May, so obviously there's been some action since then, and I was probably comparing it to dates now. So I think what would be useful is actually just to get a sense, Jill, as to what is it that requires it to tip from a green to an amber and then from an amber to a red. So just for my own information, really. Does that make sense?
Sorry, I think my connection went. I didn't hear the full question.
Sorry, Jill. It's just, it would be helpful for me to understand when I'm looking at the different actions and their status in terms of green, amber or red, what it is that gets something moved from a green to an amber or vice versa, or from an amber to a red and vice versa.
Well, just quickly, I know it's hidden away in the report, but if you have a look at, I think it's on page 4 of the report, there is actually a status key up on the top right hand corner of the report, and that actually sets out the sort of the classification for each of the colours in the. So basically, if it's amber, it means there's been a slight delay but evidence of progress, or basically if the date's been revised for the implementation 3 times or more, then it will go from green to amber. and then it will progress to red, obviously, if there's a major delay or there's no evidence of progress. So I think there were a couple of recommendations speaking to Karen about where they may possibly, you know, we need to get revised dates on, and they may possibly go to amber, but obviously we need to consider that for the next report. But that is the categorisation, the status key there, which sets out the classification for the colours.
Yeah, thank you, Gillian. I have seen that. I suppose part of the reason that my question had been submitted in advance was simply because if you look at page 12 of that particular report, or page, I think it's 150 of the actual papers, recommendation 6B on that page is sitting at green, and it says that the agreed revised date was the 31st of May. Obviously, we're receiving this in July, and I couldn't understand why it was still green if it wasn't being shown as complete. So I think that part of it is the delay between the report being made and the papers coming to us. So I don't know if it's my issues that I need to pick that up a little bit clearer. But it's also a question of quantifying what is a slight delay, because what I think is a slight delay may not be what you think is a slight delay. So I don't know if there's a guide around that. Sorry, Gillian, I think I'm breaking up for you. But
no, I'm sorry for that. I'm just having, I think I'm having connection problems. I thought I can't hear necessarily.
They're not big issues. I'm quite happy to take these off table, to be honest with you, Brian. It's really just more for my information.
I think, Mary, it is a judgment call, though. Yeah. I think that's the issue, is that, you know, potentially we should be a bit clearer, or management should be a bit clearer and agree with the committee what a slight delay is. And in context, for some of these recommendations, there may actually be a difference in perception about what constitutes a slight delay. So it isn't, I don't think it's a science, there's a little bit of an art involved here.
Mary, are you content? Or?
Yeah, no, I'm content, because most of my concerns would probably be picked up in terms of the time delay between the report being and then coming, so it's fine.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think that the way that we can explore this issue is through the type of questioning that you just asked. So it perhaps needs to be done almost on a case-by-case basis, because, but I don't know, Gary and Jill, whether it would be helpful to have some standards that might be used to help assess whether a delay is reasonable, unreasonable, etc.
I think that's it. I mean, you could have something that flagged up to you. You know, you could say that a slight delay might be a month or even a couple of months. I mean, there would be some judgment with management in there, but just to take Mary's point, there is a bit of art involved in this. And say you have something which is business critical, and may interact with a whole other series of critical path processes. Would actually that delay might delay a whole program. So I would be a little bit cautious about using a measure like that, other than as a guide.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's helpful. Leslie, you had some comments.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think it's been noted a couple of times by Matt and Jill, there's a number of recommendations which are due for completion this year. And we look forward to seeing those completed, particularly those that are on their 4th or 5th revised dates, but I appreciate COVID will have had an impact. So we look forward to seeing completions in those. On the ICT one, and apologies if you picked this up, Jill, in your intro, I was somewhat distracted by seeing if Brian had come back online, but ICT recommendation 2B, I think it's good that the ICT recommendations are being completed, but do we have a feel as to whether we're on course to complete 2B, because that's due at the end of July? So where are we in that one? Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I was just a few technical.
Who are we looking for a response here?
Well, I was actually going to say that I have received a further update on that recommendation, saying that it is actually on course to be completed within the timescale.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. One specific question, which was actually raised by Bill, if I may, and that's on the performance management report recommendation 2.2b. Sorry, refers to a full evaluation of the implementation phase relating to the performance management framework being undertaken in 2021, and the target date is September 21, and just to ask whether we were on track for that to be done. This is on page 145 of the pack and page 7 of the paper itself.
Yes, Chair, it's Richard Wetton here, Head of Governance Strategy Performance. We are on track to do that, and we'll, although it was never an official project as such, we will conduct an evaluation of that, and we will get that done. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. Okay. I think as kind of been referred to, or at least alluded to, I mean, there's been further delay in the implementation and shifting of dates, but I mean, we're all pretty familiar with the reasons for that. I guess the measure will be when we see the next progress report and the next again, whether that trend starts to turn around. So I'm no doubt the committee will look keenly at that. But for now, thank you very much for that very detailed report, Jill, and for the questions and responses. So, well, I mean, now, Matt, that we have taken 9.4 as part of 9.1, that concludes the session on internal audit. So thank you very much to everyone for that. That then takes us into external audit, and we've got a verbal update from Caroline. Are you on the call, Caroline?
Yes, Brian. So Caroline Jameson, Senior Manager from Deloitte External Auditors. I've promised John yesterday that I'd keep this exceptionally brief, so it's just to update the committee, but there's a separate meeting being made for the wider scope report to be considered, and I guess the financial statements work is just on pause at the moment till we get the year-end accounts, and we'll be starting that at the beginning of September. There's nothing that's sort of come out since we last spoke and presented the plan, and we're currently looking at all the pensions information following feedback from all our clients across Scotland last year. We're streamlining that process and just bringing it all earlier to have our actuaries look at that nice and early, so we'll be able to feed back comments to John and the team pretty soon. And that was really all I wanted to say.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. I think that Brian has frozen and hopefully will rejoin us. We've been a wee bit beset by IT problems this morning. Are there any questions for Caroline? And sorry, before we go to questions, John, do you want to add anything at all?
No, just exactly as Caroline said, we are in close discussions around the audit that's going on, or the work that's going on in terms of external audit, but nothing further to add.
Okay, thank you, John. Any questions? Okay, thanks for that. Ali, thank you for that, Caroline, short and sweet, and we look forward to the separate meeting on the broader scope work. Okay, before we move now to the next agenda item, Ali has helpfully pinged me to say that there was a break planned just now anyway. So can I suggest that we come back at 11:40? Okay, thanks. See you shortly. Cheers. Hello again, folks. That's 11:40. I don't think we've got Brian back. I would like confirmation that Mary's back and Kirsty is here. Mary, I can see you now. And Kirsty, are you around?
Hi Leslie, just to come in there, I spoke with Brian, and there's a possible workaround just with regards to utilising audio through my speaker, which he's content with to proceed on that basis. We've got aspects of the standing orders as well that we need to align to, just with being able to remaining quorate, and also we're having the independence of the chair of the board being present as well and actually being forming part of the committee. So we need to maintain that independence in terms of Kirsty's position as chair of the board. So what I propose is that we attempt through the audio connection that I can establish with Brian that he continues on that basis, which he is also content with, and just as long as everyone can confirm they can hear him, understand him, and the meeting can then progress as is planned.
Sorry, Leslie, Ali, did you cover the piece about if it becomes a more permanent problem?
If it does, yeah, if it does become more permanent, we can explain the fact that Kirsty, given her position and role, that she won't actually be able to form part of that basis as the committee to maintain quorum. So we'd have to then adjourn and reschedule the meeting. But hopefully this audio aspect will work. So I'll just hand over to Brian now to continue on with the meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ali, and sincere apologies
to everyone.
Oh.
Well, there you
go.
We put it back now, and then just as we need to use it, we don't need it any longer. So I don't know what the learning is from that, but I'm certainly going to go away and lie down in a dark room with a wet towel around my head after this. So thank you. And in my absence, you finished off the external audit item, and I am informed that everyone was content with that progress report. So just want to confirm that that is indeed the position. Yep, that is fine. So that then takes us into item 11, which is the independent audit and inspection update report, and that's with you, Mark.
Thank you, Brian. I'll be very brief. So it's Mark McAteer, Director of Strategic Planning, Performance and Communications. In the report, there are 3 appendices attached. Appendix A gives the committee the overview of all the external inspection and audit reports that are underway within the service, just for a dashboard. And as you know, every 6 months on a cycle, you get detailed updates on those reports. Appendix B, we've got the update on the Audit Scotland report from May 2018. 29 actions have been already completed within the report itself, and at 3.5 in the report we've detailed out 4 areas where I'll come on and talk a little bit more detail with the committee. There's a couple of things I'd like to ask of the committee in regards to some of the actions. And we've also got today a report from HMFSI, which was looking into the effectiveness of the inspection report. While in a sense it's a thematic report, it's different from the other thematic reports that we've received from HMFSI because it's more about their process, their engagement, and how we as a service use their reports. And with Robert being on the line, he may well have some questions you may wish to address to Robert about that, but there are no recommendations and actions as such that follow from the particular report itself for us. In terms of the Audit Scotland report, there are 4 actions that are kind of outstanding that maybe draw committee's attention to. In terms of the action 1A, which is in regards to negotiating a pay package with the FBU with regards to the expanded role. We all know where we are on that particular item as a service. There was a ballot last year, it was rejected, and therefore we are suggesting that that action is now cancelled because clearly within the guise of the expanded role offer, that's now dead as an issue for the service and the union, and therefore the action itself is no longer appropriate. For action 2.5, which relates to training around performance management, I should probably clarify that the training element of that is in relation to the performance management system in phase rather than general performance management training across the service. In terms of general training for performance management, when people move into line management positions, be that front line, middle management, etc., they have access to development programs that do include training on performance management in a general sense. This action is a specific in relation to the system. Since we introduced in phase, the original intention was that we would train the data team and the performance team in the system, and they would then go on to subsequently train people in the use of the system across the service. What we've done since then is evolve our approach, and what we're now doing is the data team themselves are managing the performance scorecards on behalf of directorates and teams across the service. So our need to actually train them in the details of the back end of the system is diminished because the team are doing the work on their behalf rather than asking colleagues to do it for themselves. And as you know, we've set out in the business intelligence strategy that was approved by the board, that will be our future direction of travel anyway, and that the data team will take that responsibility increasingly on behalf of the service. Therefore, that training issue has somewhat diminished. That's not to say we shouldn't still be making people familiar with the systems that we use and how to access and use data. And again, within the BI strategy, we've set out some plans for doing so, all of which will be reported back to the board in due course. So while in the current paper we've put in cancel that action, I think that's probably an incorrect term. To me, we're proposing, I suppose, to take the action and wrap it up in business as usual under the BI strategy. So again, it's a question to the board, rather than cancel an action like that, with the assumption that there's an appropriate supporting text, are you more comfortable with us having a transfer to business as usual with that sign posted in the report to where that's going to be picked up and can be scrutinised either by this committee or by the full board going forward? So if you're content with that, it's a slight change it will make into future reports going forward. And we've also again got at 5.3c and 5.3a requests for extensions to those actions as detailed in the report itself. So with that, I'm happy to open up to any questions to committee members.
Thanks, Mark. And on the cancelled transfer point, I was seeing nods round the table, so I think we can take that as agreement from the committee.
Okay.
Leslie, you had some comments.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Mark. This is a comment. This is a question really for the chief. When we, as a committee, looked at the Audit Scotland recommendation 2.5, which is the one you've just spoken about, Mark, in relation to training and development, we discussed really about the extent to which the organisation as a whole was focused on performance management rather than performance monitoring. And the chief said at that point that in general officers weren't where he would want them to be, but it was a work in progress. So I'm really looking for an update on that, and then I've got a second point after that, please. Thanks.
So I don't think things have changed too much since we had that last conversation. I saw your question yesterday when they were circulated, Leslie, which I really appreciate. And I've just been musing on my response. And we've got a session on the impact of COVID. And I promise I am going to answer your question. We've got a session on the impact of COVID at the next strategy day. And if you don't mind, I'd like to take that question in the round of that during that day, because there's some wider things that I'd like to discuss in a private environment that wouldn't be appropriate for this environment. So with your permission, I'll not quite answer the question for you just at the moment.
Happy with that, Chair, and look forward to the discussion at the next strategy day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I pick up my second point, please, Chair?
Yeah, Mark, did you want to come back in on that point?
Just a brief addition, I suppose, is to say that, again, under the BI strategy, Leslie, what we've agreed is that our team will work with service delivery colleagues, principally the LSOs, to develop scorecards to support them, both in terms of local scrutiny arrangements, but also internal performance management. And that does include the development of scorecards for them, for their areas, for their stations, and also helping them to understand and make better use and insight from the data that we can help support them with going forward. So it kind of touches on to some of the performance management aspects, but as Martin says, there are probably wider discussions we want to have with you elsewhere as well.
Thanks, Mark. That's helpful.
Thanks.
Okay.
Richard, I see that you put your hand up. Is it on this point again?
Yes, it is, Chair. And just to support the Chief and Mark, and to give you some more assurance, Leslie, we have now developed a more sophisticated performance monitoring and management product for service delivery. It is a still work in progress, but we are attending the area meetings now to showcase that product with senior officers, and it is a purposeful piece of work to design that with those that are going to be using it. and it includes much more detailed information at the fingertips of officers that they've had before in terms of incident information, mapping information, and a fair amount of detail in terms of the ability to drill down within the performance information that we provide. So again, it's probably something the Chief would like to discuss with you separately, but it's certainly something we're able to evidence to you should you require it.
That's helpful. Many thanks, Richard.
Okay, thank you, Richard. And Mary,
So,
sorry, Leslie, is your point on the same point, Mary? No. Okay, Leslie, please continue.
Thanks, Chair. And this is a point really in relation to the inspectorate review of the value-added inspections. And it's really, I'm just wondering whether the overall judgment could be paraphrased to be reasonable, but perhaps could have done things quicker. So is that a reasonable paraphrasing? And secondly, I'd be looking for comments really from Robert and from Martin on that. And
sorry, Leslie, can I just stick with the Audit Scotland report just now before we move on to the inspector's report?
Sorry, Brian. Yes.
No, that's okay. Mary, do you have a point on the Audit Scotland report? Yeah.
I think I do, yes. Sorry, I'm just scrolling between my screens. It's actually on 0.53C and 5.3E, if that's okay. So one is just to check my understanding that I've got it correct, and then I may have a follow-up question, Mark. So are the dates that are in red the revised dates? And also in 5.3C, it makes reference to it going to amber, but it's in red. So can I just check that I've not picked any of these things up incorrectly between the two papers? You're on mute, my dear.
Yeah, I'm on mute. You're correct. Yes, the revised dates are the ones that are in red.
Can I
don't know. Yeah, maybe ask Richard. Can you maybe pick up the one about the ambers and the reds between the text and the? Because I hadn't spotted that, Mary. So I honestly don't know.
Yes, sorry, Mary. So the ambers and reds are just the decisions that we take in terms of where we think they are in terms of the revision and their progress. It's really down to it's an estimate in terms of how we manage that.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, I think I picked up some aspect of that incorrectly, Richard, so that's my fault. But I am noting, though, that 5.3E is changing to June 2021, which is obviously complete. So I just wondered, is there an update in terms of, is that action having been revised to last month now complete?
I don't know if it's complete at this point, but I can certainly go and find that out for you, Mary.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, does that cover our questions on the Audit Scotland report? It feels, Mark, as if this is never going away, but I think we are close to that point now.
I think we're very close to that discussion in preparation for this paper. And I was saying to the team that I would like it to go away by the time we come to report next to the committee.
Well, that's your personal performance target for the next. So, we will remind you of that. Yeah.
I'll remind Richard constantly between now and then.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very, very much for that. And that does take us on to the inspector's report, the review on assessing the effectiveness of the inspection activity. And the reason this has come to ARAC to have a look at is really around this matter of having regard, because it's not an unfamiliar term, but it's a peculiar term nevertheless, because what it means to one person is not necessarily what it means to somebody else. So I thought it would be helpful for the audit committee, from its perspective of trying to look at controls and trying to assess the level of assurance that assurance reports are actually providing, to just come to a view around this issue of having regard and whether the report as written provides assurance that the organisation is across the piece having regard. Now, I mean, I certainly now have a very clear view on that, but I just wanted to open up the issue for a little bit of discussion, not just from audit committee members, but also from Martin and the team, because I think it would be good to try and find a common place for all of this where there's a shared understanding. And Robert, I didn't really anticipate having you here when we said this would be on the agenda, but it would feel inappropriate if I didn't just offer you an opportunity to make some comment on this issue, if you may.
Thank you, Chair. No, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I do appreciate the opportunity to make comments. So for the benefit of the recording, I'm Robert Scott, and I'm Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Fairly new to that post, and obviously not the author of this thematic report, which is always a good thing to be able to say right at the start, isn't it? That you can blame somebody else for anything in it that's not palatable. But, you know, actually, in truth, the report has been very helpful to me as a new incumbent of the role, and it's given me an opportunity to reflect on those processes in place for handling the recommendations from thematic inspections that are presented to the service. And like yourself, Chair, I have wrestled with that definition of having regard, and I think it is an interesting term, and one that might mean something different to each of us in the room today. I think, you know, we could dwell on that and we could try and define it in the absolute utmost detail. But I think actually the more important part of that is that the recommendations are being considered, and that those considered recommendations are leading to improvements. And I think that's ultimately what it's about. It's not about making sure that you tick the box and that you do what we recommended within the reports. It's about adding value. And I think that's where this particular thematic has actually helped me in that sense, that it's not only reflecting on how Scottish Fire and Rescue Service manage our recommendations within our thematic reports, but it's also self-reflecting back on the inspectorate to say, is our work adding value? Is it too much of a burden on the service? Is it an overlap between what's happening in internal audit? And all of those questions, as a new Chief Inspector, are questions that I'm asking myself at this point, and asking myself in a bid to try and make those improvements. I think we've lost Brian, haven't we? Has he dropped off again? Oh, you're there, Brian. Sorry, I thought you were away.
No,
Apologies.
No, that's okay.
So no, I think you know, all of those are valid points, and I've had some really useful dialogue in my first few months with Mark and with Richard and the team on how those recommendations coming into the service are being handled in the first instance at the appropriate levels, who's taking ownership, what are the action plans that are put in place to ensure that that continuous improvement is actually achieved, and how is, you know, what is the oversight of that? And I'm very encouraged, and now having attended the Service Delivery Board with the senior managers in the service in attendance, and seeing that process in action, and seeing how those action plans are progressing and how progress is being monitored, and then seeing it today at Audit and Risk Assurance and seeing the level of scrutiny that the board applies at that level is all very encouraging for me, you know. But it does always come back to that question. Are we adding value? Are the outcomes changing? Is the service improving as a result of these recommendations? And if not, then we have to change the way that we are carrying out our inspections in the first instance to ensure that that's the case. Now, previously we have been carrying out reviews post inspection. We've been coming back to look at, you know, how the service has been performing. I don't necessarily agree that that's a healthy way forward. I think that's your role to carry out those reviews, and you're doing it very well at multiple levels. But I think we will continue to return following the publication of our inspections, but more to say to ensure that you have understood the recommendations, and that you have taken what, you know, we meant within the words in those reports, and turned that into an action plan that actually reflects what the author of the report had in mind at that time. And all of that, I think, comes back to when I met with the board in the first instance and spoke about increasing the relationships between the inspectorate and the service, and the inspectorate and the board. It all comes back to relationships for me, and it all comes back to having dialogue and being able to pick up the phone to each other and saying, your action plan says this, but that's not necessarily what we meant when we wrote that recommendation. And it's about us reflecting on, you know, how we build those relationships moving forward, and how we have that dialogue So actually the terminology of having regard is less and less important if you can pick up the phone to each other and actually speak about what it was you had in mind when you wrote the report in the first place. So thanks for allowing me to say those few words. I'm sorry, I'm probably a wee bit wordy, but it's my first meeting and I'm showboating.
Well, you did it very well, Robert, I have to say, and that's been really, really helpful, because it is really assigned that the words of having regard to the place where they should be, and it's really not, should not be the focus on how we look at these things, and I'm sure the committee are hugely encouraged at this kind of refreshing approach that's to be adopted. So really welcome seeing that unfold as we go forward. I don't know whether Robert's comments have really sort of taken the wind out our sails now in any sense, but do we have any kind of observations either on the contents of the report or indeed what Robert has just covered?
Chair, if I may, it's Richard.
Yeah, Richard, please.
So just following your email from the other day, and with your forbearance, I did have a look back, and I think this has been discussed before within the service. There is a very brief briefing paper on this issue, just around the definition. Obviously, the actual phrase in terms of having regard is present within the Fire Scotland Act, but it doesn't provide a definition as such, or words to that effect. However, there is a piece of legal case law, but it's in English law, which does try and provide a definition to this, and I'm quite happy to circulate that. But it effectively is saying, having from the English case law piece, which wasn't related to fire inspection, it was related to some education work, but it was saying guidance into account, and if they decide to depart from it, they must give clear reasons for doing so. Have regard to involves a greater degree of consideration merely than to consult, but plainly does not mean follow or slavishly obey. I would add that clear reasons referred to must, in my judgment, objectively be proper reasons or legitimate reasons. So it gives us a bit more to go on, but I think certainly on that, I would say we as a service certainly do give greater degree of consideration to the inspector's recommendations. And so in our papers where we do set out that we have tried to give due regard, I think we're following certainly the spirit as well as the definition laid out in that piece of case law. But I'm quite happy to circulate that for information.
Thank you, Richard. And having read the case law, I would probably discourage its circulation because I didn't find it particularly helpful. And Robert, you want to come back in?
Yeah, just to recap, Chair, that from my observations, I am completely satisfied that the service is having regard to the recommendations within the inspection reports. Although I do like the term slavishly obey.
Well,
I think we should steer away from it.
You're the chief inspector, Robert. So, I mean, perhaps you want to substitute having regard.
Perhaps not. I think I've got more success with having regard than I will with the other term, Chair.
Yeah. No, that's obviously it's for Martin to determine these things, but certainly from the committee's perspective, I mean that your approach to this is not only pragmatic, but feels absolutely the right one. That kind of partnership way of working, that continuous improvement focus. It's not on the detail; it's on the substance. I think all of that is excellent. I mean, one of the areas that the report does highlight, and it's a bit sort of unclear, it doesn't draw absolute specific conclusion, is around the interpretation of those recommendations and whether they have been actioned or whether they haven't been actioned. And that for me appears to be, from that analysis of the situation, the only area where it would appear that maybe some further work around the process might be required, but that's just a personal observation. So
I think I think it's a fair observation, Chair, but again, I think it's down to having dialogue face to face and reflecting what was meant within the recommendations rather than just issuing the report and then expecting someone else to interpret that for you. Yeah,
no, that's absolutely the case. So it's been a really helpful discussion, I think. So thank you to everyone, in particular to you, Robert. So, I mean, the recommendation is that we note the Audit Scotland position, and we go through the effectiveness report on specifically the issue of having regard. I think we've done that pretty well. So thank you very much to everyone for doing that. And that then takes us on to the next chunk of our business, which is around internal controls. Who is talking to the strategic risk update?
Chair, it would be myself, David Johnson, Risk and Audit Manager.
David, thank you. Over to you.
Good morning. The purpose of the report is to provide the committee with the updated strategic risk register for scrutiny. A lot of work has been undertaken, and I gratefully accept on behalf of myself and others the kind of sentiments you made at the beginning. And I think a lot of that is down to different working now with data services and creating the actual input template and creating the output report, which is now attached in Appendix 1. And it's that appendix, and in terms of reporting to yourself, that the main focus of work has been on looking to identify not just the risks, but trying to articulate them in a smarter fashion, trying to make the controls and the actions more transparent for scrutiny. And I think within the report this time, we're also now including in 1D and 1E information in terms of some of those risks now closed and some of the control actions now closed as well. And that this work in attempting to make kind of information clearer will continue. We've got kind of dialogue with the heads of function now as well to have that kind of one-to-one in terms of updating the information. So the framework is developing, and it will continue to do so. Looking to kind of build upon the feedback that's now coming in. In terms of the report itself, a number of risks have been closed, a number of risks have been added to the register, and these are outlined within the report. And I'm happy to take any questions that you may have, Chair, or the board on any part of that.
Great, thank you very much, David. So I'd just like to move straight into questions, and on this, Mary, you had a question.
I had two actually, and they relate to what would be page 4 or 204. The first is in relation to SPPC013, which is a partnership working one, and the second one is the one below it, the SPPC006. I suppose there's a general question around, has there been any particular instances that have caused the risk identification that would be useful to know about? I thought it's specific to each one, I guess, the wording in the top one, number 13, working due to a lack of coordination and information resulting in missed opportunities. What I wasn't very clear about from the risk description was whether or not it was a lack of coordination within the service or within the community planning partnership structures. So it was just a reflection around some of that. And then the second one, I thought it was just interesting in relation to the engagement processes. There wasn't anything particular, it was just that had anything occurred specific.
Okay, thank you. Who would like to respond?
If I maybe just pick up one on the engagement, just for Mary, so that she's up to speed. As you know, we've created the insights team, and we've located them within sales development department. So recruitment processes are now underway, Mary. So we're out to advert, and hopefully the team will be in place over the next few months. So as soon as we've got a more specific timeline on that, we're out to advert. We need to see what candidates come forward, who has what term time of notice to give to existing employers, etc. We'll have a bit more clarity, but we're well on the way to bringing that new team into being. And if maybe Rich can touch on the one on the partnership working.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mary, for the question. So just in terms of our regular review of our risk register, the way that we're managing and seeking to coordinate all of our partnership and collaboration activity, it was just felt that we would merge two risks essentially, which were very similar. In terms of the way we've worded the risk, yes, I think you're right. What we're talking about is a potential internal problem of coordination and just making sure that we don't do that. And so in our minds, and I suppose in terms of sort of broadly good practice around risk, sort of trying to merge those things into a coherent single risk, reflecting on how we manage that within the service and how we look to coordinate that activity through the directorate.
Thank you, Richard. Can I come back on that one, and then I've got one more?
Yeah, please do.
Just on that point, I think that the recognising the internal risk is right and proper. I do think, though, that we need to recognise the fact that there are risks associated with how our partners operate and work and respond within that CP structure that we don't have an ability to do, but that does impact on exactly the same outcomes. I don't know if that needs to sit in the register itself, Richard, but I do think it needs to be acknowledged that actually how those CPPs conduct themselves varies significantly across each of the two of them. And then just the other one was in connection with SPPC 012, which is on page 9 or 209. And again, it was just I thought it was interesting the way that the security arrangements resulting in increased risk to property and staff. And it was just to get some reflection on similar to what Richard's just done for the other one. Was there something sitting behind that particularly? Is this just a review, or are there increased security risks that we're concerned about?
So I can answer both of those, Chair. Thank you again, Mary. So yes, I think we do recognise that we're acutely aware of the variation across community planning as well as scrutiny within that for the service. To give you some assurance of that, we have a piece of work which is underway where we're looking to provide both ourselves and you as board members more assurance about how we are monitoring our activity at community planning level, and not just from a risk management perspective, but also from a point of view of really understanding the kind of value that we're adding. And I suppose that's a bit it moves into the risk spotlight around sustainability, which we're about to talk about as well. But certainly we're putting in a little more concerted effort to garner more information in a more systematic way about the issue that you describe around what's happening at community planning level. So that's our thinking there, and the work that's happening in one of my teams to do that. On the security piece, the driver for that risk is really to try and give us a single risk in relation to the work that we're doing around organizational security. So the recent review that we've undertaken, that work has completed. On the back of that review, we have recruited the wrong word. We have appointed a senior manager, an area commander to take forward that work and the outcome of that review, who will report to me on that, and we will manage that through our organizational security group. So I suppose it was really to give a clear sense that this is a risk that we're mindful of. In terms of the increased risk that you determine, not particularly, no. Although obviously as a service we're consistently mindful of the risk to the service, both in terms of the national alerts and cybersecurity and all of these things. So I suppose it was really just to provide some focus to that work.
And if I can, just one more follow-up, and then I will be done. Just in terms of that, then, given that there's a new piece of work being undertaken, can we reasonably expect that risk rating to be managed down in the future, or is yeah, okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mary. Leslie.
My points have been picked up in that discussion, so happy to go with that, Brian. Cheers.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, well, thank you for the very full responses to those questions. And if there are no other questions, we will note that strategic risk update, and that moves us into the spotlight risk, which is on corporate social responsibility. And is that over to you, Richard?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It is me. So, Chair and committee. This relates to risk SPPC 008, that there is a risk that the service is unable to demonstrate corporate social responsibility and sustainability due to a lack of coordinated approach, resulting in uncoordinated development, loss of workforce, stakeholder and public confidence. The risk spotlight report is there. You've seen that. I won't go through that in detail, but essentially, for our service, it's very important that we demonstrate sustainability and corporate social responsibility. Our view is that we do that. Certainly, the board will have seen, members will have seen this reported to you in various places, particularly around the work that we do in terms of community planning, the work we do in partnerships, our work around equality duties, work with young people, and certainly the work that's going on in Ian's directorate around climate change and the sustainability aspect. So I think in terms of the management of the risk, we're very confident and do regularly report on those matters. However, the purpose of this in particular was, as a commitment made last year, was to try and put a wrapper around that to develop a framework, and a framework which would then enable us to, I suppose, report more confidently on all of that work that goes on. The reason it was delayed was purely around a staffing issue last year. That member of staff has now returned to work, and the work is now progressing. So whilst I don't feel that there is a particular risk, or the risk is particularly high, because we're able to evidence and demonstrate that we do report and meet these duties, it is still our intention to provide that sustainable development framework so that we're able to showcase these things for you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Do we have any questions for Richard? No. Bill had submitted a question which actually was a question that I had also, Richard, and that the specific action is around the sustainable development framework in the preparation of this. And Bill has raised a question that the approach of wrapping up the more specific issues around social responsibility, for example, corporate parenting, social initiatives with disadvantaged youngsters and working with communities. Is there a concern that by wrapping all of this into a sustainability framework, there is specific focus on the sustainability element of it, and we lose sight of or don't give sufficient focus, or indeed blow our trumpet enough round about these other more specific social responsibility aspects?
Thank you, Brian. No, I think it's a fair point and challenge, but it certainly would not be our intention to lose sight of any of those things that you mentioned. The service is focused on these issues on a daily basis. Yesterday, I was we were in a meeting of the People Board, and we were talking very specifically about our approaches to corporate parenting and young people, supporting young people, and supporting various initiatives in that respect. So no, we would not lose sight of those in the framework. And a number of us, myself included, are champions for some of these areas anyway across the service. So we would, I think, challenge each other if some of these things were missing from the framework.
Yeah, no, that's excellent, and it maybe is just one of these examples where the narrative and the risk register does not fully reflect that. It seems to be more narrowly focused, but that's very good, and it's clearly we know from reporting elsewhere the enthusiasm and passion that's applied to this. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Chair. Okay,
well, that's been very useful. The final item on this agenda item is a verbal update on fraud and whistleblowing, and that's over to you, John.
So, Chair, thanks. John Thompson, Acting Director of Finance and Procurement again. Basically, nothing to inform the committee in terms of fraud or whistleblowing at this stage, Chair.
Okay, that's good to hear, John. Thank you. And then, Robert, you're playing a starring role in this audit committee. We're back with you for your annual report. So would you like to give us the highlights, please?
Thank you, Chair. And I take your point when you mention the word highlights there. I'll be as brief as I possibly can. So committee members have had an opportunity to look through the report, so I don't plan on labouring it in any great detail. The report not only this time is a quarterly update, but is also a reflection back on last year's activities. During last year, we carried out, are in the process of concluding 3 local area inspections and 3 programmed thematic reviews. And also 2 reviews on behalf of the Minister, one relating to the transition through Brexit and the service's ability to continue operating in that time period, and also how the service is carrying on business as usual during the COVID-19 pandemic, both of which had favourable outcomes, and these were shared with government and the Minister. This year, during 2021 to 22, we plan to complete 2 local area inspections and 3 thematic inspections. And if you'll indulge me, Chair, I'll just go into that in a little bit more detail. So during last year, we concluded the City of Edinburgh local area inspection and published that in June of 2020. And we also commenced the inspection of Midlothian and Argyll and Bute using desktop analysis because of the restrictions associated with COVID, but it was very, very difficult, I've got to say, to carry out a proper inspection in a fire service environment through a virtual means. And actually, we were very grateful to the service in May when they allowed us to carry out face-to-face field work, albeit with appropriate distancing and restrictions and risk assessments in place. So to get back in a fire station environment and sit in front of firefighters and ask questions is really the only way that you're going to get them to open up, if I can be quite frank about it. Doing it in a virtual platform just isn't getting the same results. So we were grateful to get back out and to carry out that work. The Midlothian inspection has now been complete and the report was published in May 2021, and we have now concluded, and we have 1 fire station left to visit in Argyll and Bute, and that report will be completed later in the year, in August 2021, we anticipate. Just on the issue of local area inspections though, Chair, it's something that I've observed coming into the role as a new Chief Inspector. The manner in which we've carried out local area inspections in the early years of Scottish Fire and Rescue Service was, I believe, entirely fit for purpose, in that we were a new entity and that we required to understand how we were engaging with our local authority partners, how we were engaging with our other blue light partners, and how our fire stations were feeling about that transition into a new organisation. But as the years have gone on, I would reflect that there has been a diminishing return on the investment that we make as an inspecting body, and that the manner in which we carry out these inspections is at times not producing a yield relevant to the input, and therefore I would plan on revising the way that I carry out local area inspections in the future, and moving from a blanket approach where we visit every single fire station in an area to a significant sampled approach where we visit somewhere in the region of 50% of the fire stations within an area. Now, we'll obviously go to consultation and you will be consulted on that change, but the reasons behind it, I think, are eminently sensible, that we have now reached a maturity in the organisation that we're actually just seeing a lot of repetitive feedback from each of the area inspections that we carry out. And if we simply shared those local area inspections widely across the organisation, then we could benefit from them much quicker than having to wait until the inspectorate comes to your local area to tell you pretty much the same things that your partner was told last year in their neighbouring area. So, without being too flippant about it, I think it makes complete sense. And if we took a best value approach, I think it's a very expensive thing that, we have to undertake those inspections, and the cost of hotel and accommodation and the carbon footprint element of that have to all be considered as we move forward. So I will be coming to consult with you formally, but just to give you a heads up that I do plan on changing the way that we'll carry out local area inspections in the future. You will note that we carried out thematic reviews in the training of retained duty system personnel and published that report in April 2020, inspection of command and control, and published that in August 2020, and of course the report we spoke about earlier today, assessing the effectiveness of inspection activity, which was published in March of 2022. 2021. We also revisited one of our reports that we done back in 2019, which was the management of fleet and equipment. And this was again under my predecessor, this approach of reviewing reports that had already been considered and actions being taken. And I was very pleased to actually undertake that review and to send inspectors to meet with members of Ian Morris's team, Scott Roberts, your fleet manager. And I just wanted to mention it very briefly today to applaud the service on the amount of work that had gone in to meeting the recommendations within that report. There were 32 recommendations within the report, and pretty much all of them have been undertaken now. And by the dialogue that we had, the very positive dialogue that we had with Scott when we met him in person, he, by his own admission, felt that the improvements that had been made had been very worthwhile. And whilst it had been challenging to meet the recommendations within that report, that he did see the value in doing so. And as such, I've been able to write to the Chief Officer and acknowledge that we consider that report to be concluded and that we will have no desire to revisit it in the future. So I think just to put on record our thanks to the service and to members of Ian's team for all the hard work that went into achieving those recommendations. So moving forward, I spoke very briefly about the no deal Brexit report and the COVID-19 report, and I don't plan to get into it again, Chair, unless anyone has any questions around it. But moving forward, we are now in the process of carrying out a review of health and safety with an operational focus. And again, we're very grateful to the service and the managers within the service for allowing us to meet with them and for being so open and honest in their feedback that they've been given. So that report will be published in August this year, and it's very encouraging so far. We've now just started and we've sent our data request just last week actually to the service in relation to a thematic on firefighting in high-rise buildings. This, I think, will be one of the more high-profile reports that we'll carry out during my term as Chief Inspector. I think it will gain some media attention, it will gain some rep body attention for reasons associated with the tragedy that occurred in London 4 years ago in Grenfell Tower. And I'm sure we're all alive to that. But just to give the committee some comfort, that the briefing that I've gave to my inspectors is that they will be focusing their attention on how Scottish Fire and Rescue Service respond to incidents in the built environment and the risks that exist in Scotland. This is not a review of how Scottish Fire and Rescue would respond to Grenfell Tower or any other risk that exists in any other part of the country. Your job is to respond to the risks that exist in Scotland, and therefore it is your job to review your effectiveness in doing that. And whilst we will clearly make mention of national issues, we will not be drawn into that national debate of how other services carry out their business or other decisions that have been taken. It is purely a review of how Scottish Fire and Rescue Service operates. So just to give a degree of comfort on that, that's the briefing that inspectors have been given. We're also carrying out a very light touch review of how the service is preparing for the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26. And as you would expect, we will be looking at your preparations for that conference and also your plans to respond should anything occur during that time specific to the conference, and also your business as usual plans to ensure that the service is still able to operate in normal circumstances and the normal types of incidents that you attend. So we'll be carrying out that review, and the plan is for that review to be again very light touch, and it probably won't contain recommendations, it will contain observations, because it would be absolutely futile for us to put recommendations in and publish the report when the conference is going to happen a couple of months after the publication. You wouldn't be able to action them. So I don't see there being a major impact on the service other than the potential media spotlight in relation to the observations. And also the review of operational and protective equipment. Now, this was on the programme of inspection for this year, but we've decided to push it back to September. And part of that was because of the work that's being done by your internal auditors on a similar theme. And we had a very useful conversation with internal audit, and we've also established an ongoing relationship with internal audit to ensure that that crossover and any duplication of effort is avoided in the future. However, I think our inspection will probably look at some areas that perhaps our colleagues in internal audit didn't focus on, and more of that operational aspect. And what I'm particularly interested in from a personal perspective is not the equipment that you purchased, because that's the chief officer's job to determine what is the appropriate operational decision to be taken, operational equipment to be purchased, and I would not want to set myself up as an alternative chief officer. You have a chief officer, he's your professional advisor, and it's not my job to do that as well. However, I'm more interested in the decision-making process and in the role that you in particular as board members play in that decision-making process to scrutinise and to challenge the chief officer and his team in the purchase of operational and protective equipment. So that's mainly where my focus will be going, and I think, you know, the other part of that is how effective was the equipment on the ground when it was brought in. You know, did it achieve what you hoped it would achieve, and was it received by the end user in the way that you hoped it would be received? So that's the sort of focus of the inspection that will commence in September this year, and we look forward to seeing the results from that. The only other bit in the report is appointments within my own inspection team, and other than myself obviously taking up post in the 1st of April, we also have a new assistant inspector in Rick Taylor. Rick Taylor was the chief of Lancashire Fire Service and retired and took up post in the inspector as an assistant inspector on the 5th of October 2020. And if you can indulge me for 2 more minutes, Chair, I just want to explain that I have restructured the team within the inspectorate. So I have now given each of the assistant inspectors a functional reference. So rather than just being a generic resource, they now have areas of expertise that they're aligned to based on their previous experiences and their qualifications. And as such, they will align with members of the strategic leadership team and form those personal relationships with members of the leadership team in the service. So we'll have someone leading on prevention and protection who will engage with Stuart Stevens. We have someone leading on asset management, for example, who will engage regularly with Ian and his team on that particular subject, and so on and so forth across the organisation. But also, as well as that service element of engagement, I also want to expose them to the various committees of the board. I want to bring along members of my team to ARAC and to the full board and to Service Delivery Committee, etc., and give them an opportunity to be seen and to widen their own knowledge, but also to create those personal relationships with board members. And I would hope that that would be welcomed in the future, Chair, and I look for your approval.
Thank you very much, Robert, and just absolutely support that. I couldn't agree more that this is all about relationships, establishing, maintaining those relationships. So absolutely, fully support that, and greatly encouraged by a lot of what you've said. I mean, certainly from an almost kind of technical perspective, you're talking to an audit committee in terms of yield, return on investment, sampling, risk-based. You're preaching to the converted here, so no, good to hear, and I think it's all just hugely encouraging. I mean, I was just reflecting as you were speaking, the number of occasions where you know the board individually and collectively have had the opportunity to see you and meet with you, and you know, that's a fantastic beginning, and from what you're describing, it will only continue to grow and get better. So yeah, that's fantastic. And in terms of Robert's report, do we have any comments or observations? No, I mean, such was the self-explanatory nature of that, and your very useful commentary, Robert. So thank you very much for that. Much appreciated. Okay, so that then takes us on to the quarterly update on gifts, hospitality, etc. And John, is that over to you?
It's over to David, who's going to give us an update.
Oh, David, sorry, apologies.
Thank you, Chair. This is the kind of the Q4 report for the end of last year, and the Q1 report for this year are outlined within the report. The Q4 was delayed just due to the timing of the meeting, and the associated registers outline the gifts, hospitalities and interest reported by the service and are now recorded on the website for public view. The new gift hospitality and interest register is live. That's been communicated out. One of the changes to that is in relation to the interests. So where somebody has identified an interest, or where an interest has been identified, there's the requirement for the line manager now to identify any kind of conflict with the role and any controls that are necessary. I know there were some questions forwarded in advance of the meeting today, that where we identify something as through the NFI process, that has actually meant that it wasn't a formal declaration by the individual in advance of that process. But subsequent to the NFI process, we will then go out through the compliance team to formally have that declaration made by the individual, and then secondly, that also requires the line manager and to maybe not investigate that, but to ensure there is no conflict, and then to put those controls in place. So in terms of raising awareness and raising ownership, we'll publicise the policy. We'll continue to ensure that the reports are being made. We'll also continue to use the NFI process to aid the services governance arrangements. And where all that comes together, the anticipation is we continually just ensure that we have accurate reporting coming through. So I'm happy to take any questions you may have, Chair.
That's helpful, David. Thank you very much. And Leslie, you had a question.
David's dealt with it. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. I think the issue, David, is, as we've kind of discussed before, is how do we, on the assumption or presumption that we need to improve around the disclosing of interests, and that's a big presumption. Will the new policy serve us to do that? Because I mean, the evidence is that where interests are being identified, they're not by virtue of self-disclosure. Now, the hope is that the new policy and the advertising of that policy will produce some results. So can you just remind us when the new policy was launched and what the messaging has been round about that policy, and whether there have been any specific responses to it? For example, have management actually, when they've been made aware of an interest, come back to you and says, yes, we have looked at this and there's no corrective action needed, or there is corrective action needed and this is what we've done? Or is it too early to say, really?
I think the policy's been live, Chair, for the last couple of months now, and in advance of that, we were also consulting with various individuals to ensure that the policy was going to be fit for purpose, but two, also to raise awareness of it as and when we were communicating it out. Where we're coming back is we haven't found the requirement to identify any additional controls that are coming back through those declarations. But one of the things that we do need to do, which is probably more aligned to the kind of wider risk and governance framework, is to raise awareness of fraud, to raise awareness of gifts and hospitality. And within my team, we'll look to engage with some of the kind of departmental management teams, just to talk to them, just to make sure they're aware of their obligations to disseminate that information down. And in doing so, we'll continue to use the kind of iHub and other kind of publications to raise awareness as well. So it's engagement. I think that's what we're attempting to do.
Okay, that's helpful. I wonder, when you come back with this report, you could maybe just consider what feedback you might be in a position to give us about how it's being received and whether it's bearing fruits or not.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So thanks for that. Which takes us to the end of the agenda, with a couple of housekeeping things still to do. The first of which is just to review actions. And Ali, I'm not aware that we've clocked up many this today.
Thank you, Chair. A potential for two actions. These relate to item 8, the annual governance statement, just consideration to the amendment of the board highlights section, and addition of a section relating to risk appetite to be added against the chief officer. And the potential second item relates to item 11, specifically the Audit Scotland Action Plan 5.3a, confirmation to be sought from the action owner regarding its June completion date, and whether or not the desire of the committee is for that to be confirmed via email at the earliest convenience, or potentially through the next update at the October meeting, because that will be covered as part of that specific update, as opposed to it then being a separate action. So it's just to confirm the committee's position regarding that. Thank you.
Okay, and is that last point worthy of being recorded on the update on the gifts hospitality and the impact of the new policy being specifically picked up in David's report at the next meeting?
Yes, we could add that as an additional action, should you wish.
That's great. Okay, so are people content with those three actions? Yeah.
So, Chair, it was just to confirm then, would you be content with the second one relating to item 11 for the Audit Scotland Action Plan just to be updated at the next meeting, or do you want some? Yes, content, just the next meeting. So just don't have that as an action, just on the forward plan.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And then just looking at our forward plan, do we have any comments on the forward plan as you have it in the papers? No, okay, thank you very much. And then we have...
Chair, it was just to highlight as well the potential for a special meeting as well that we've got penciled in. I wasn't sure if you were going to cover that.
I thank you for that. I was when I talked about the date of the next meeting, but thank you nonetheless. So our next meeting is the 14th of October, but we will have an additional meeting and we're still trying to tie down a date for that. So we will confirm that very, very soon. Okay, so if there's no other formal business, I just want to... Bill McQueen is not here and is stepping aside from the committee and the board. I just wanted to formally put on record our appreciation for Bill's contribution to the committee. He's only been on this committee as this constituted committee for a short time, but I think we will all miss the rigour or maybe some of us won't miss too much of the rigour. But anyway, you know what I mean. So it's just a record our appreciation for Bill's contribution. So thank you very much to everyone.